welcome to ADAA's Question and Answer webinar with Dr. Debra Kissen, the author of Anxiety Busting Workbook for Kids, Fun CBT Activities to Squash Your Fears and Worries. My name is Jolie Busby, and I'm the Education and Training Manager for ADAA. Now I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator, Stephanie Thomas. Stephanie is the owner of a solo practice in Westminster, Maryland, and also works part-time as an associate at the Anxiety and Stress Disorders Institute in Towson, Maryland. Her unique life experiences growing up in rural New Zealand, traveling and living in several countries around the world, as well as the master's degree obtained at a culturally diverse pastoral counseling program from Loyola College, enabled her to bring a willingness to risk failure when she opened her solo practice in 2009. Welcome, Stephanie. Thank you so much for moderating today. I'm going to share the next slide and then turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Jolie. Well, welcome to Dr. Debra Kissen, who's written so many different books. She is the CEO of Light on Anxiety CBT Treatment Center in Chicago. And I noticed on the website she has lots of locations around the Chicago area. She's the co-author of Overcoming Parental Anxiety, Rewire Your Brain to Worry Less and Enjoy Parenting More, the Panic Workbook for Teens, Rewire Your Anxious Brain for Teens using CBT, Neuroscience and Mindfulness to help you end anxiety, panic, and worry, and break free from intrusive thoughts. So Dr. Kissen is the co-chair of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America Public Education Committee, and I was just chatting to her earlier and would love to get her involved more in the Child and Adolescent SIG, which I'm the current co-chair of. So, and Dr. Kissen was the recipient of the 2020 Gratitude for Giving Spirit Award and the 2018 Anxiety Depression Association of America Member of Distinction Award, which is quite highly prized. Okay, so welcome. And Dr. Kissen, I wanted to say, what made you decide to write this book? What was the inspiration?
Got my copy handy. Oh, and just a shout out to my wonderful co-authors of this book. So I wrote with two wonderful clinicians at my treatment center, Light on Anxiety. And so it's always really fun combining perspectives and coming together for these kind of projects to really consider best practices and what are you doing in the treatment room. And so kind of going back to your question, the inspiration is how to take all the fun that we have in doing CBT for anxiety work with children and how to make that accessible to broad audiences. It might be hard for parents to get the kid in the door in the first place, but it's sometimes even harder to get them to leave at the end of a session, or in terms of the fun that we have and that as clinicians that we can have working with them, and like the laughs of how do we play with anxiety and how do we learn when it's kind of sending us messages that we don't have to believe are necessarily true. And so I think, yeah, just dissemination and how do we get these tools available. And it's written for younger kids, and that could be anywhere from 6 to 12, but the age range is pretty open, but it's mainly a tool for parents and children. So each exercise has something that you're doing with your adult partner, and then conversation points of your child asking you, like, what was the time that your anxiety bully was telling you you couldn't do something? So really helping parents be the CBT coaches for their kids, because as parents, I'm a parent, you want to do anything to help your child. Unfortunately, the things that we try to do can backfire, whether that's being overly reassuring or trying to rescue too soon, or there's so many things that because we love so big that we want to do to rescue them. So how do we give well-intentioned parents some tools that they can use with their children? So all of that was inspiration, motivation.
Yeah. And I noticed when I glanced through the book this week that you actually encourage the parents to do the the activities along with the children. And I was sitting here thinking, so many times we have a child come in and they've inherited that anxiety from somewhere. And often if you can get the parent coach
Yeah.
to join them in the activities, the parent learns so much as well for themselves.
Yeah, and for the child to not always feel like the identified patient and they're the one with the problems. Like we humans have this challenge in that our brains are very reactive to danger as they should be. And so it's certainly not just your child. And as parents, sometimes it might feel like I'm not supposed to, if I show them that I'm afraid, that's just going to make it worse. And so there could be this tension between either minimizing their struggles just to show them you don't want to burden them with your anxiety, but there is a way to show, okay, this is really hard for me, and this is how I'm going to kind of challenge myself. I'm going to give myself a reward for doing this that we get to benefit too. And in the process, like we're normalizing their experience. Like, of course, some things are going to feel really scary.
Mhm. You use a lot of metaphors in the book, and we had some questions beforehand that
Mhm.
asked about how well the concepts and metaphors might work using, going through the book with children with intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities.
Um, I, I would hope that it would work across all levels of cognitive abilities, in that I think to find a really good way to explain something, it should be as simple, clear, and user-friendly as possible. And so, and that doesn't mean like dumbing down a concept. It just means if we could get to the essence of a concept, like what is that active ingredient? That's what I want to remember. Sometimes it feels like I need to remember 100 things. And if I could just remember, like, what is exactly the goal I'm trying to
Mhm.
accomplish? And if there's one thing I would like to remember about this, what is this? So it was really written with the intention of simplifying, user-friendly, taking away the noise that, we all just have so much extra information these days. But
Yeah.
I would say if someone has like an exercise in particular, I would love, we could even talk about that more in detail. But I would hope it would work.
And I hope some of the people who are on the call today will put some of their questions in the in
Yeah.
the in the Q&A so we can talk more on that. So
Yeah. Mhm.
another question we had was, how do we encourage kids to practice the coping skills on their own?
So it's a great question. So I'm going to give it the so many different answers. In general, the difference between children and adults, I mean, there are a lot of differences, but adults often can get to the point where their intrinsic motivation is there, maybe after like could be a lifetime of realizing like, this isn't working. The more I avoid things, the worse my life is getting, and I'm only getting more anxious. And so when adults come in, often they have a pretty clear idea that even if it's hard to change some of the patterns, like there's discomfort. A lot of the times with children, it could just feel like if you just leave me alone, it would be fine. Like stop trying to get me to do the things I don't want to do. The concept of like you're missing out on fun or complex other like um how avoidance works, that when we avoid, it only reinforces a fear. There's a lot of complexity to understanding how to break down these anxiety cycle patterns. So when we're working with kids, we want to use both intrinsic motivation, because sometimes there is some like, I don't like when my mind does that, and also extrinsic motivation. So setting up a brave point system that's about being willing to try different things out. And we have throughout the book, every time they do an exercise, they get a brave point, and creating a reward system with your child. And sometimes parents feel like I've tried that in the past. It doesn't work, or I don't want to bribe my kids. So it's something I think getting practice at creating a consistent reward system it's so much harder than it sounds. And I think for people feel like I tried it and it should have been simple enough. But it's like setting up I don't know, a payment structure for employees at a company. Like if it were so easy,
Yeah.
it
I mean,
would
as
go more
adults,
smoothly. It is a lot more complicated to be consistent. And so that happens throughout the book, in terms of getting the practice points. And then I would say for parents, there's this desire to kind of overly encourage, like this would be a good time to use your box breathing right now, or uh, why don't you, yeah, why don't you just face your fear bully and do that one thing. And so you could give them a little bit of a prompt, but sometimes if you try to kind of encourage too much, it might backfire too. And that's the thing, you don't want a power struggle where kind of encouraging, but at the end of the day, this is up to you. You know, I
Mhm.
believe in you and I believe you could use these tools. I'm here for you. But like the one thing I can't do is make you do these things. I'm here to cheer you on. I'm going to practice myself. But like that's kind of the hard part as parents. Like if we only had a remote control, like now you're going to practice your slow breathing. Now you're going to practice challenging that thought with realistic thought. So we want to encourage, but then also know when to drop the rope. Does that make sense?
it does. And that I see in the chat, and please, could people please put their questions in the Q&A rather than the
Hmm.
chat? Just want to remind you because it's easier for me to follow along. Um, um, and one of the questions was, if my parents are somewhat bossy and not empathetic enough, how to communicate the ideas involved in the book to them. But I think that's the whole point of doing the book together with a parent,
Right.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm always in it with them. It's my own journey and my own, like, these are the things I'm also trying to practice. And if it comes from a genuine place of this is the same toolbox that at different times I'm trying to use more effectively than others, it, it could take away that power struggle. And we really are joining them in this work. So
Mhm.
it's subtle, but it could make a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And I noticed in the Q&A, someone from South Africa said, how did you include cultural and belief systems within the book? Which I think is, because different cultural beliefs, different parenting styles, and different cultures can
Yeah.
impact that.
It's kind of like that other question. I think with such specifics, so I'd have a hard time. I don't know if someone if that person who maybe there was an example of something, it feels pretty universal. I'd say if somebody believed that no matter what, they shouldn't encourage their child to have any distress. So maybe like I don't want them to even have to tolerate what it feels like to feel scared. This book wouldn't be for them because it's working on how do we work that muscles of training our brain to tolerate moments we don't like. But I don't know. Stephanie, since you are from New Zealand,
Yes.
can you give me an example maybe of, and I know you kind of like, was there anything throughout the book that feels like might have a different interpretation or less of a universal application?
I didn't come across anything, but then I've lived here for so long that I
Yeah,
noticed some of those cultural differences. But it's so,
yeah.
if what I would recommend to the readers is if you get the book and you go, hey, this doesn't apply in our culture,
Mhm.
by all means, write to Deborah and say, hey, when you do an update,
Right. Yeah.
might be
And
something.
use flexibly in your own life with the languaging that
Yeah.
also makes sense. Like there's getting to know your own guard dog, which a lot of the metaphors to your anxiety brain is a guard dog. It's trying to protect you, but sometimes it's barking at the pizza delivery guy. So that might not be applicable, even the language of a guard dog or pizza delivery. So there might be references like that let me know because I'm lifelong learning. And then also just really taking taking the tools that work and anything that doesn't work, leaving kind of that tool behind. And that's really for all of us at different phases of life. We might be in more of an exposure mode of like, I'm going to really go for facing my anxiety. And sometimes it's about like, I'm just going to at least more actively practice. How do I challenge some of the thoughts that, in fact, everyone hates me? Well, what is the evidence of that? So whatever pace you or your child are at is perfectly good mode to be in.
Yeah. And I was thinking, the ACT principles of,
Mm-hmm.
the concept of
Mm-hmm.
anxiety on your boat. When I'm
Mm-hmm.
working with fear of flying clients, I'll make it a plane instead of a boat. Same
Right.
concept. We're just applying it
Mm-hmm.
specifically to that person and where they're at.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so we had another question in here that I was actually going to ask you about. How this might work with kids on the autism spectrum. And the question is, my daughter lives with high functioning autism and she has social anxiety. She is almost 16 and doesn't think she will drive or work. How can I show her she can do these things? And what strategies can we use to help her?
Yeah. And I would say it's the same application. It might be the pace. So in terms of kind of picking those those goals of what am I going to work on as target um
And that's what,
different core fears. And so everyone, like I tell clients, for example, say you have a fear of snakes and you're not traveling anywhere and it's not getting in the way for you, or fear of flying and you don't have, it's not impacting your life in a very meaningful way. It's really key that you pick the areas that are most critical for valued living and then set up very, what for you are meaningful goals. And maybe for your daughter that is uh maybe volunteering for half an hour with one person new. So it's about just setting up the next step forward that isn't going to feel so big and so overwhelming that we end up not doing it. And I think wherever any of us are at, there is that next step forward in opening up,
Mhm.
making our
And
world a little bigger.
And that is something in the book because you give the child the opportunity to write in what their specific anxieties and fears are. And
Right.
that.
That, and I was just in terms of, so in for a fear hierarchy, well, we kind of, different examples of what we do. So we kind of talk about number one, like what would your life be like in terms of like what is anxiety taking from you? So in this case, we have a like a life pizza in terms of friends, family, adventure, school activities. So for you in particular, what would living life on your terms be? Not your parents, not your friend, but like if you could not be so afraid, would you join the science club? Would you maybe try out for a sports team? So none
And
of
I
us
was
have to do everything. We just want to be able to do what is truly value added for us.
yeah.
Stephanie?
And I was thinking for a 16-year-old, do you really want mum and dad to drive you everywhere to all those parties and things, or all those social events at school that you might want to be involved in, or maybe don't want to be involved in, and is not driving in a way to avoid, not being able to drive? Is that a way to avoid being involved in things? Because that would be so anxiety provoking. I think there's
Right.
some,
So kind of the what's going to be vitalizing, what's going to really add to your life. And so as a parent, it might be like, oh, if only they would. I mean, sometimes we have parents that like, I would like to see them going to more parties and be more social, but maybe that really for that child, that's not a key goal for them naturally, not just because of anxiety, but they maybe prefer more quiet activities. But there is something by definition when there's anxiety disorder and anxiety is really showing up a lot that is impairing functioning
Mhm.
based on how someone would want to live their life. So the way we create an exposure hierarchy in this book, we talk about what's your scary pie recipe? Kind of ranking the ingredients of like, what are the top ways that anxiety is showing up? And we give kind of a list of the most common fears. And then people could kind of check off, you know, bugs, being left alone. And then for each individual, they have their own scary pie of ways fears come together to start really taking hold and blocking functioning.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know
Yeah.
if that answered the question for the parent who has a 16-year-old, but there really always is a next step. And it's about, I've worked with clients who maybe severely agoraphobic that it took maybe a couple of weeks to get to the point of like sticking their hand outside of the door and waving the air. That is super meaningful. That was a huge step forward for where they were at, where they hadn't left the house. So it's about really valuing progress per
And
person.
seeing even small steps as progress instead of you got to achieve this huge goal.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think for all of us, I think that really is overwhelming when we feel like progress only means like getting to that point,
Yeah.
that end point.
Mm-hmm. Whereas progress is all the steps in between, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
one of the things it talks about in the book too, right? You're
Mhm.
progressing through the steps, and I noticed that the challenges get harder and harder as you go through.
Mhm. And you're kind of, and I always tell people I've sometimes worked with kids that really just want to go for it. And I always tell people that it's not that anything bad's gonna happen to your brain if you go to the top of your hierarchy. Like I've been so afraid of heights and I'm going to go to the top of this building and look around and do all these things. It's just that often people aren't willing to do it. But some kids come in, well, less adults, honestly. More kids might come in, you know what? This is exciting. I'm going to challenge myself. And they'll just rip the band-aid off, go for the top of the hierarchy. And in a couple of sessions, I see how they're really like deactivating so many of their fear networks by kind of like really going big and hard for, and that's great. I would never stop someone. I just think if I tried to push too hard, they probably just won't do it. That's the only problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what's kind of the timing strategy if you're using this book as a parent, if you were using this book with a child, how would you kind of time the different chapters?
That's a great question. I would say just to not, I actually really love that question. So my gut, and this might take a little bit longer, is maybe like once a week, maybe twice a week, and there are 25 activities in there, and they're brief, but just to kind of not overdo, I'd rather underdo it and being consistent. So I'd say maybe like twice a week, because it would be a protocol we would do in with a client maybe over more than 12 weeks anyway. So
Mhm.
find a pace, but the key is it's so easy to burn ourselves out. We're like, I'm gonna do this and we're gonna read it every night. And I'd rather, once again, the small steps of when are we gonna do it? Sunday night, what room? Like just kind of really planning for it because life always
Yeah.
gets messy. And so really carving out that time
Mhm.
once, twice a week.
Okay. So one of the questions again was, what are some strategies for kids to get rid of worried voice and false comfort in their thoughts? And what are some of the specific strategies that you've got in the book for that? Because I know you do.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll do two parts. So did you say get rid of like the worry voice? And so
Yeah.
number one, it's about recognizing that like by definition, we all will always have um our worry voice. So in the book we do a lot about like guard dog, like, oh no, it's gonna be dangerous. Oh no, in the dark I could get hurt. And we do need that part of our brain because it's keeping us safe and like, oh no, don't run in front of the street. So our guard dog is there and we want it to be there, but it's about learning that sometimes how we relate to it might be, okay, it's just barking because the mailman dropped it. Just because it's barking and saying something's wrong doesn't mean I need to listen. Oh no, you're barking, something's terrible, or even yelling, like, be quiet. We could just, oh, okay, that's my guard dog barking. I can notice that and then redirect back. And we could also learn to listen to, we call it in the book, we call it our wise owl. So in contrast to our guard dog that's like, oh no, oh no, oh no, we have a wise owl, like, well, perhaps perhaps some people at the party won't like me, but then again, I am friends with this person and they did invite me for a play date. So our wise owl, our kind of frontal cortex, gives us more of a balanced perspective, and it needs a little bit more time to kick in. So the most immediate thing for survival is going to be our amygdala, like danger. But then we can learn to listen and say, okay, this is what my guard dog's saying. Everyone at the party is going to hate me. And then in contrast, wise owl, what do you think? And then we could reinforce that behavior of learning to access the messages of our wise owl. And so it doesn't mean we can't ever and we don't want to squash out the fact that our worry brain's going to point out things going wrong. But sometimes I give the example for clients of, and maybe each of you guys could do this in your home right now, but like if you hear a background sound, so take a moment and hear in the room if you hear any sounds. Like, while I just said that, I heard kind of like my heating system. There was like a little hum of maybe some water flowing. I'm kind of near my boiler room. So I wasn't really noticing it 3 minutes ago, but as I was listening to it, it was a lot more evident that that sound was there. So it's not that there was never the mechanical sounds, but it's sort of what am I attending to, and what am I choosing to not attend to, and what am I interpreting those sounds as being. So I don't know if that kind of gets at.
Yeah, so you're teaching kids to pay attention to
Yeah,
the front of their brain instead of the amygdala.
right. And
Yeah.
knowing that I think sometimes people could get in kind of an adversarial relationship with their anxiety because it's so annoying, and you want to have fun and it's warning you like all these things that are going to go wrong. Like, what a bummer. And then what could start happening is kind of like, leave me alone, or it's trying to drive me crazy. It's a natural thing when your anxiety brain's so annoying to you, but then that relationship can only make it more activated. Because if it's coming from a fight or flight saying, oh no, something's wrong, and then we're like fighting with it, then it gets even louder. So how do we learn to compassionately disengage if there's not an immediate threat to be managed? And this is, once again, all of us. It's ongoing work.
I know I'm going to be using the concept of the different guard dogs with some of my adult clients. I particularly liked the worry whippet. I thought that was such a great description of worry.
And my little panic poodle, my dog Bowie, was
Yes.
Original inspiration. So we took the anxiety disorders, and instead of, this is social anxiety disorder, and the description of when you're experiencing more fear of judgment, and this is a shy guy Shih Tzu, and then keep me closed Chihuahua is separation anxiety. So when are we experiencing different flavors of anxiety? And then panic poodle, worry whippet, more like GAD, checking chow chow is kind of more on the OCD front. Sometimes kids it might not be obvious how OCD could show up in a younger kid. You might see more of the classic hand washing, but then there also might be a lot of reassurance seeking, like, do you promise you're going to be there? Are you sure you're going to be there? Or can you say that again? Or maybe them asking you to repeat what you just said. So different flavors of anxiety, trying to start breaking it down a little bit, because then it gets easier to play with it versus it's just anxiety. It's just this big, massive, scary blob.
And actually one of the questions was, do you think your book can help those affected by OCD? And as I listened to what you were just saying, I was thinking, yeah, because people with OCD often experience a lot of anxiety around their intrusive thoughts and
Yeah.
compulsions. And this
Yeah,
book
I
gives
would
some
hope.
ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would hope so. For me, we at Light and Anxiety, we treat a ton, maybe over half is OCD. And so using that OCD framework is really the best framework for all anxiety disorders. It's really about exposure response prevention. So how do we open up to that which we fear, and then response prevention, not do these short-term behaviors, avoiding the party, asking for reassurance, uh, washing your hands, all these, and sometimes it's just the thinking. So even if it's more of a generalized anxiety, worrying is kind of a compulsion if we're mentally reviewing and reviewing. So I think that working on OCD and really working on any other anxiety disorder, you're doing the same things of opening up and kind of disengaging and blocking behaviors that keep our brain from learning that it could handle so much more than it knows it could handle.
Mhm. Okay. Another question we had was how to help younger children with anxiety. And this person must be a therapist because they say I incorporate exposure therapy as well.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I think no matter how young, if you get someone to do the thing that they're fearing, even if they don't conceptually, it's that behavior, like, oh, I can't stay alone in a room for 5 seconds. And so making it really fun to challenge, let's see if you can do 7 seconds, and then them engaging in that behavior that they didn't know they could do, they're going to be kind of elbowing back anxiety, and then really skill building. So I think exposure therapy is phenomenal with young kids because they could earn points, and most importantly, like just genuine praise for, like, wow, you're so brave for doing something that felt hard, and then yeah, get back more of their life. So I don't know if the person who asked if there's any even situations that come to mind. Feel free if there's any like specifics, like for example, if someone has a fear of blank or
yeah, I'm wondering if she's talking or they.
yeah.
I made an assumption it was a she. I apologize, folks. Um,
Mhm.
I wonder if they're talking about children younger than, like as young as 3 and 4, because we see children that young in our office,
Yeah.
don't we? Well, I
Yeah.
don't because I deal with older kids, but you
Uh,
probably do.
um, I would say, in terms of, yeah, you could go pretty young. I'm thinking the youngest that I've ever worked, but it was really more of like,
Mhm.
eventually you're working more with the parents in terms of changing. So parent-based anxiety treatment. So how do we respond and how do we encourage different kinds of exploration? But
Mhm.
between the parents and the child, you could really get at the anxiety.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. So, uh, somebody else commented in here, and it's important to recognize that ERP is not the only evidence-based treatment for OCD or anxiety disorders. And I'm thinking there's,
Mhm.
one of the newer treatments that are coming on around is ICBT, which is not yet, doesn't have the research base for working with younger children. So
Mhm. Yeah.
there's
And feel
also
free, like,
medication therapy. Yeah.
the more I love having conversations. So if someone has something in the mix that they were referring to, feel free to,
Act, mindfulness, but there is
yeah,
some there, like the whole concept of the wise owl. That's a little bit of, that's going into
right.
act and mindfulness
A
space,
100%.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And even when I think about exposure therapy, I have a hard time pulling apart ERP, mindfulness. Like, I don't know how to do exposure therapy if we're not practicing mindfulness. And also, how to do ERP if we're not doing valued living. What is important to you and what's worth tolerating being uncomfortable for? So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's a question from a parent.
mhm.
My son is 7 years old and plays basketball. If he suffers an injury during practice, he becomes very tearful and won't finish his practice. He says he feels embarrassed when he gets hurt. What can we do to support him through this?
So interesting. And so it's kind of we do what's called like a functional analysis, because there could be, it's sort of what is the function of that behavior of him getting really upset. And it sounds like it maybe is the attention on him. For some kids getting hurt, they might feel a little bit more panic, like, oh no, is there something wrong with me? And so it would also be interesting if for him any attention is uncomfortable, or what he deems as attention because he did something wrong, or negative attention. So in class, does he ever take a risk of asking something, saying something if he doesn't know for sure he's going to get it right? So it sounds like he might be someone who's uncomfortable with anything being wrong, even if it's he didn't do something wrong, he's just hurt. And so we play with like I've with clients walked into a store, or like a public exposure of like I tripped and fell down on a chair, and then I was like, okay, and I just want you to look around, like, or what are people's reactions? Like, say they were thinking like, you're so clumsy, you're a disaster, like, can I handle that, even if that is what they're thinking? So we will practice what is it like, we won't get hurt necessarily, but like trip, or so we kind of have to get in there, but there's something to practice these. It might not be our favorite moment, but is it something that we can handle? And or is it so dangerous to be perceived as like injured or not perfectly okay? But like telling someone, oh, it's fine, isn't going to work. We kind of really have to practice.
Yeah. Okay. Eric Erichua, I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong. Jansen from South Africa says, and I clicked that because I was so impressed that there was somebody here from South Africa. Would you say sensory awareness is an important tool in addressing anxiety in younger children?
Sensory awareness for the child, or I would say as a clinician, what parts of the equation children are going to get or not, that would be harder. But I would say, as a clinician, understanding a child's sensory experience, and like, are they reactive to, is part of their panic about, or their anxiety about trains going by, the sound of the trains? Is it the, yeah, like, what are the different experiences for all of us when we have a fear? Like, what makes up that fear? So the example that we just said for that child, it might be, is it like the experience of feeling like hunched over and they feel ashamed? So like really understanding what is someone's sensory experience. And for some individuals who have more of a sensitivity, it could even get to the point of panic disorder, where it's really about the fear of fear. So for an individual, it's about learning to play with, what does it feel like for, maybe your heart might be beating faster because you're scared. Does that mean you're in danger? No, it just means your sympathetic nervous system is kicking in. So, or, oh no, my face feels red. That's embarrassing. Like, what's really happening? So yes, I would say that is important. For some children, their anxiety will show up with less of a sensory piece to target than others. And you want to kind of
Yeah. And
use time as carefully as possible.
I work mainly with middle school teens and above, and one of the things I notice is a lot of children are really aware of the sensory stuff. They're not as aware of how to label it because they just don't
Right.
have the developmental capacity to understand it. And I often, I noticed one of the activities in here was let's label what are some words you can use for what you're feeling. And I think that's so important to kind of help people, help children especially, learn that that there are other words that can be used. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of like your body on anxiety, or they imagine your body uncomfortable. So yeah, like we talk about like what is your scary, like the ice cream shop, and like when you're feeling scared, how is that showing up in your body in particular? And then we like think of a time where you felt really scared, what was happening, and then now imagine how your body felt in that moment. Think about all the uncomfortable, yucky feelings and write them down, and then draw a picture of your own ice cream cone for that moment. Like, so we really we want to slow it down, and that is an exposure, interoceptive exposure. How do we open up and tolerate the feelings as they are, even if they feel weird? So it's the difference between like my face feels hot and I understand why I'm having that feeling versus, oh no, my face feels hot, everyone's judging me, I don't know what's wrong. And then it becomes kind of stuck in the fear cycle. When we have fear about fear, we get more fear. So different ways to break it apart. And like, this is just us feeling uncomfortable right now, and that's going to happen, and we can handle it.
And if I have words for it, I might be less scared of it.
Right,
Say, oh, it's that.
right,
Yeah,
right. And I
yeah.
think as adults, like I don't, it's very common to have had a panic attack or just weird feelings. Like, why am I feeling this? Is there something wrong? It's bewildering. It can be when uncomfortable feelings show up. It could feel scary.
Mhm.
So yes, important.
Okay. There's
Mhm.
another question. What strategy or activity should we get the parent to do in session with your child?
I mean, every single one of these activities ends with, so like the one that I was just showing about like your body on fear, and then each exercise ends with a for you to discuss. So take turns discussing your answers to the following questions with your adult partner. After hearing each other's responses, take a moment to compliment each other for bravely discussing. So tell me about a recent time you were afraid, what fear flavors were on your ice cream cone, and then discuss with your adult partner which scary feelings do you have? And which scary feeling flavors does your adult partner not have? And so they're kind of talking about like, so each exercise has that component. I'd say if you're working with a parent and child, I just think kids love seeing their parents have to do stuff too. So I think the more that the parent,
Yeah.
and it's also good for a relationship, and it's the kind of thing as a parent you kind of you should do, and maybe it would even be fun, but then you're making dinner and then it's harder to find the time. So I think those moments of jointly working on this would only be beneficial,
Mhm.
but no pressure. It's like we can't always get the parents in the room.
Yeah.
For
And it doesn't always have to be a parent. It could be a grandparent.
Right. A partner. And it could be an older sibling, say someone has like a sibling who's often like just yeah, even like a babysitter who's like available, just an adult partner it's kind of the CBT coach
Right.
working with them.
Right. There was a question earlier on, and there's two more questions in here, but I want to get to this one first. W- Um, was it time to seek professional help?
And that's a great question. And I I personally think the sooner the better, because help is good. Like it's kind of like going to the gym. When do I need a trainer? If someone could go to the gym and on their own figure out their workout routine, or if there was actually a trainer available, it doesn't mean they necessarily with a capital N needed the trainer, but it's just going to make it easier for something that could feel overwhelming. So I think sometimes people wait, is it bad enough to justify that there's an official anxiety disorder. And so I would just say, if it feels like life is harder than it needs to be for your child or for your family, and you've kind of tried some like gentle support and coaching and trying to get them to do these exercises, sometimes like if they're acting on fear all the time, they just may be so shut down, reactive, that as a parent, you you might not be able to get them to do anything. Because sometimes, as a clinician, I'll say the same thing. The parent's like, I just said that yesterday. And the kid's like, okay. But it's the same thing with my kids. I could tell them, give them advice about something, and that's super not helpful. But coming from someone else, somehow that all of a sudden they're able to hear it. So
Okay.
in terms of when is it just normal anxiety versus an anxiety disorder, like each disorder has different criteria, but it's really about when I'd say you're feeling uncomfortable more often than not, when there's impaired functioning. So in some sphere of life, academic, family, friends, functioning is not at the level that it could be minus the anxiety. So it's sort of about the frequency, the intensity of the symptoms and functioning. You're starting to get closer to a full-fledged anxiety disorder versus normal anxiety. Email is probably at the start of it, Dr. Debra at Light on Anxiety. So if you have questions, or if I'd love your feedback. If you tried an exercise and it didn't translate, just stay in touch and let me know. And I'm learning with you. So keep me posted.